It was just another rainy morning in Elk Grove, a boy alone in his wheelchair, a busy father lost in work calls, never seeing the storm, and a young woman working quietly at a small-town cafe who saw everything. She brought him in from the cold, warmed him with cocoa and a smile, but she didn't know someone was watching. Will her kindness lead to a life-changing surprise? Stay with us. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The morning air in Elk Grove, Oregon, was crisp and clean. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and damp earth, the promise of spring stirring in the leaves. James Whitaker pushed his son's wheelchair along the narrow sidewalk, careful not to let the small bumps in the pavement jostle the boy too much. Lucas Whitaker was 9 years old, his dark hair neatly combed and his eyes bright with curiosity. He sat quietly in his chair, bundled in a light jacket, hands resting on his lap. The two of them made a familiar sight around town, James in his tailored coat, tall and composed, and Lucas in his chair, always with a soft smile that said more than any words. They passed by the bakery on the corner, the smell of fresh bread mingling with the morning chill. Lucas tilted his head to catch a glimpse of the warm golden loaves in the window. James noticed and smiled, making a mental note to stop there on their way home. But first, he needed coffee. James turned them onto Main Street, where the Morning Brew Cafe sat like a small beacon of warmth against the gray sky. The chalkboard sign out front promised fresh pastries and the best espresso in town. James guided Lucas to the awning of Riverbend Cafe just across the street and set the brakes on the wheelchair. "I'll just be a minute, buddy," James said, his voice gentle but distracted. He pulled out his phone, the screen already lit up with urgent messages. "Stay right here, okay? I'll get us something warm." Lucas nodded, his small hands curling around the worn armrests of the chair. He didn't mind waiting. He liked watching the people drift in and out of the shops, like the way the morning light painted soft shadows on the sidewalk. James stepped into Morning Brew, the bell above the door giving a soft chime. Inside, the air was thick with the rich smell of roasted coffee beans and the quiet hum of conversation. James joined the short line, one eye on the pastries behind the glass and the other on his phone. A call had just come in, urgent, marked with a red exclamation point. He pressed the phone to his ear, turning slightly to find a corner by the window. The line moved slowly, but he barely noticed. On the other end of the line, his partner in Chicago spoke in a low, intense tone about contracts and missed deadlines. James's brow furrowed, his fingers tapping against the counter as he listened. The barista called for the next order, but he only offered a quick nod, still lost in the details of the call. Outside, the sky shifted. Gray clouds rolled in, heavy and fast. No one noticed at first, not the young woman sweeping the stoop of the bakery, not the man reading the newspaper by the bus stop. Only the faint rustle of wind in the trees hinted at what was coming. Lucas felt it before he saw it. The breeze turned sharp and cool, ruffling the edges of the blanket draped over his legs. He looked up at the sky, at the dark clouds gathering above the square, and his small fingers tightened around the chair's arms. The first drops fell light and quick like the soft taps of curious fingers. Lucas blinked, surprised, then tried to pull the thin blanket higher around his shoulders, but it was no use. Within seconds, the light drizzle turned into a sudden downpour, sheets of rain hammering the sidewalk and bouncing off the awning above. Lucas flinched as the cold seeped in, his shoulders hunching against the gusts of wind. Across the street, the bell above Morning Brew chimed as someone left, but James didn't look up. He was deep in conversation, gesturing with one hand as he balanced his phone and the coffee order, oblivious to the sudden storm outside. At Riverbend Cafe, Emily Carter was wiping down the counter when she heard the rain. She paused, glancing out the window at the gray curtain of water that had swallowed the street. The early morning light flickered behind it, turning the world outside into a blur of muted color. Emily's gaze shifted to the boy in the wheelchair. She recognized him, Lucas, the sweet kid who sometimes came by with his father on Saturdays. Today, though, he looked small and lost, the thin blanket clinging to him as the wind tugged at its edges. She felt her heart tighten, a quiet ache that she knew too well. Emily had always been drawn to the ones left in the rain, literal or otherwise. She knew that feeling herself, the way cold could slip through the cracks and settle deep in your bones. Without a second thought, she set the rag aside and walked to the door. The little bell chimed softly as she stepped out into the downpour, the cold biting at her cheeks. But she didn't care. She moved quickly across the short distance to Lucas, her footsteps sending small splashes across the sidewalk. "Hey there," she said gently, crouching beside his chair. Her voice was warm, steady, cutting through the drumming rain. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Lucas nodded, but his lips trembled as he tried to speak. "My dad, he said he'd be right back," he managed, his voice barely a whisper. Emily's heart squeezed at the quiet fear in his words. She glanced across the street, saw the blurred figure of James in the cafe window, his back turned to the storm. She didn't know the man well, but she knew enough to see he was occupied. "Come on," she said softly, reaching for the chair's handles. "Let's get you inside where it's warm. You don't need to be out here like this." Lucas hesitated for a moment, then gave a small nod. Emily straightened and guided the chair toward the entrance of Riverbend Cafe. The awning offered some shelter, but the rain had already soaked Lucas's blanket, and his thin shoulders shivered with each gust. Inside, the cafe was warm and welcoming, the scent of fresh cinnamon rolls and coffee wrapping around them like a blanket. Emily wheeled Lucas to a small table near the radiator, the spot she always saved for quiet mornings. She grabbed a clean towel from behind the counter and handed it to him. "Here, let's get you dried off a bit," she said with a gentle smile. Lucas took the towel with small, cold hands, his eyes wide and grateful. Emily moved quickly, pouring a cup of cocoa and setting it in front of him. The steam curled into the air. "Soft and sweet, drink this," she said. "It'll warm you right up." Lucas stared at the cup, then looked back at her with eyes that said more than he could. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice still so quiet it barely reached her over the soft clink of dishes in the kitchen. Emily just nodded, her smile soft but steady. "No need to thank me," she said. "We all need a little warmth on a morning like this." Outside, the rain kept falling in thick, steady sheets, but in the warm light of Riverbend Cafe, the world felt softer, calmer, and as Emily watched Lucas take his first careful sip of cocoa, she felt something small and bright kindle in her chest, a gentle reminder that even the smallest kindness could change the shape of a day. Could a billionaire's gratitude transform her future? Emily moved around the cafe with quiet efficiency, her movements gentle but sure. She fetched another towel from the back, folding it neatly before draping it over Lucas's shoulders. "Is that better?" she asked softly, her voice warm like the cocoa she'd given him. Lucas nodded, small hands holding the towel close as the chill began to ease from his bones. Emily watched him for a moment, her eyes soft with understanding. She didn't ask why he was alone, didn't press with questions, she simply offered comfort, one small gesture at a time. She turned to the counter, grabbing a fresh scone from the display case, still warm from the morning's bake. "Would you like this?" she asked, setting it on a small plate in front of him. Lucas looked up, his lips parting in surprise. "Are you sure?" he whispered. Emily smiled. "Of course, it's a rainy day, and rainy days need something sweet." Lucas hesitated, then took a small bite. Crumbs clung to his fingers as he chewed slowly, his eyes wide with a mix of relief and wonder. Emily felt a flicker of something deep in her chest, a quiet pride in the simple act of giving. She moved back behind the counter, wiping down the coffee machine and glancing out the window at the rain that still fell in soft, steady sheets across the street. James Whittaker finally slipped his phone into his pocket, the call ending with a sigh he didn't bother to hide. He reached for the 2 coffees he'd ordered, his mind still tangled in the details of the morning's negotiations. But when he turned to look across the street, his breath caught for a moment. He saw Lucas through the cafe window wrapped in a towel, his small hands cupped around a steaming mug, and standing beside him, Emily Carter, her hair damp from the rain, her face turned to the boy with an expression that was gentle and patient. James paused at the door of Morning Brew, his hand tightening around the coffee cups. He didn't move right away, just watched. The world around him seemed to slow, the bustle of morning traffic fading into the background. In that brief moment, he saw something he hadn't expected to see. He saw kindness, quiet and unassuming, offered without any expectation of thanks. It was a reminder of something he hadn't let himself think about in a long time. James finally stepped out into the rain, tucking the coffees under his coat. As he crossed the street, his shoes splashed through shallow puddles, the chill of the water seeping into the edges of his trousers. But he didn't notice. His eyes were fixed on the small scene in the window. On the way, Emily leaned down to say something that made Lucas's shoulders relax just a little more. When he reached the door, he paused, watching through the glass for another heartbeat before he pushed it open. The little bell above the door chimed softly, the warm air of the cafe washing over him in a wave. Emily turned at the sound, her eyes widening just a little as she saw him standing there. "Good morning," James said, his voice calm, but carrying a weight he didn't try to hide. Emily straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "Morning," she replied, her tone polite, but unsure. She didn't recognize him, just another customer in a city full of strangers. But Lucas turned in his chair, his eyes lighting up as he saw his father. "Daddy," he said, relief and happiness mixing in his small voice. James stepped forward, setting the coffee cups down on the counter before crouching beside the wheelchair. He reached out, brushing a damp strand of hair from Lucas's forehead. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly, his tone softening in a way Emily hadn't heard before. Lucas nodded. "Emily helped me," he said simply, his voice still so small. Emily shifted her weight, a flicker of something like embarrassment passing through her expression. "I'm sorry," she said, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her apron. "I saw he was getting wet out there, and I didn't want him to catch a chill." James looked up at her, his gray eyes steady and unreadable. For a moment, he didn't say anything, just studied her face, as if searching for something beyond the surface. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice quiet, but carrying a depth that made Emily's shoulders relax just a little. "You didn't have to do that." Emily shook her head. "It was nothing," she said quickly, but James heard the note of conviction in her voice. The way she said it made it clear it wasn't nothing to her. He stood slowly, his hand resting on the back of the wheelchair. "It was kind," he said simply. "Not everyone would have done the same." Emily didn't have an answer to that, So she just gave a small smile and moved to refill the cocoa in Lucas's mug. The warmth of the cafe wrapped around them like a soft blanket, the steady patter of rain outside fading into the background. James watched her as she worked, the way she moved with quiet purpose and an easy grace. He noticed the small details, the careful way she set the mug down so it wouldn't splash, the gentle touch when she brushed a crumb from Lucas's sleeve. He saw the way she didn't ask questions, didn't expect anything in return, and he felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He didn't say much else, just stood there for a moment longer before guiding Lucas back out into the rain. But as he left, he glanced over his shoulder one last time, his eyes meeting Emily's for a fleeting instant. In that look, there was something like a promise, silent and unspoken, but real all the same. The rest of the morning passed in a soft hush, the rain slowed to a drizzle, the clouds breaking to let thin shafts of light slip through. Emily moved through the quiet cafe, cleaning up the small messes of the early customers, but her mind kept drifting back to the boy in the wheelchair and the man who had come for him. She didn't know who they were, not really, just a father and son caught in a sudden storm, but there was something in the way the man had looked at her, something that told her this morning had meant more than she understood. James, for his part, spent the rest of the day thinking about the woman in the cafe. He tried to push the thought away to focus on the meetings and the deals that always demanded his attention, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw the way she had knelt beside his son, her hands gentle and sure. He saw the quiet kindness that didn't ask for anything, the small steady grace that had been offered without hesitation. That evening, in the quiet of his office, James found himself staring at the small photo on his desk. Lucas, smiling in the late afternoon light of the park. He thought about the morning rain, about the way Emily had moved through it without a second thought, and he realized that he needed to know more, not because of gratitude, though he felt it deeply, but because something in her quiet courage had reminded him of a promise he'd made to himself a long time ago, a promise to honor the simple kindnesses that make the world feel just a little less cold. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the one he was looking for, William Burke, the man he trusted to see the truth in people, even when they tried to hide it. James hesitated for only a moment before sending a simple message: "I need your help, there's someone you should meet." And in that quiet, private moment, a plan began to take shape, one that would test not just the kindness of a stranger, but the quiet resilience that lives in every small act of grace. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a soft golden light replacing the gray drizzle of the day before. Emily Carter woke early, the memory of the little boy and the quiet man lingering in the back of her mind like a gentle echo. She brushed it away as she tied her apron, readying herself for the breakfast rush at Riverbend Cafe. The small bell above the door chimed softly as the first customers drifted in, seeking warmth and a simple meal to start their day. Emily moved through the tables with practiced ease, her smile gentle and her hands quick. She liked these early hours, the quiet hum of conversation and the comforting scent of fresh coffee. But there was something different about this morning, though she couldn't put her finger on it. It was as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something small and important to unfold. She didn't question it, just kept moving, her feet steady on the worn wooden floors. Around mid-morning, a man walked in. His coat was old and frayed at the cuffs, his hair a little too long, his face shadowed by a thin beard. He carried a worn backpack slung over one shoulder, and his eyes, though tired, held a quiet dignity. Emily noticed him immediately. She always noticed the ones who looked like they'd walked a long way. He took a seat at a small table near the window, his shoulders hunched slightly, as if trying to make himself smaller. Emily walked over, menu in hand, her voice calm and kind. "Good morning," she said softly. "Can I get you something warm to start your day?" The man looked up at her, his expression guarded but not unfriendly. "Coffee, please," he said, "and maybe some eggs, if that's all right." Emily nodded. "Of course," she said, "I'll get that started for you." She didn't ask questions, didn't wonder out loud if he could pay. She just moved to the kitchen, calling the order into the cook and pouring a fresh cup of coffee. When she set it in front of him, he wrapped his hands around it like it was the only warmth in the world. She watched him for a moment, then turned to the next customer, her mind already drifting back to the little boy from the day before. But she didn't have time to linger on memories. There were dishes to wash, orders to fill, and a rhythm to keep steady. The man ate slowly, his movements deliberate and careful. When he finished, he sat for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the last crumbs of toast on the plate. Emily watched from behind the counter, sensing the hesitation that hung in the air like a held breath. Finally, he stood and walked to the register, his shoulders squared as if bracing for something. Emily stepped forward, her smile gentle but steady. "How is everything?" she asked softly. He looked at her, his eyes flickering with something like apology. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "I don't have any money to pay you right now." His words were low, almost ashamed. Emily felt the air around them still, the quiet of the cafe wrapping around them both. She didn't flinch, didn't let her smile fade. Instead, she reached under the counter, pulling out the small jar where she kept her tips from the morning rush. It wasn't much, just a few crumpled bills and some coins, but it was enough. "It's all right," she said softly, pressing the money into the register. "Everyone deserves a warm meal, even if they can't pay today." Her voice was calm, her hands steady as she covered the small check with her own hard-earned money. The man blinked, his mouth opening as if to protest, but Emily just shook her head. "Don't worry," she said gently. "Sometimes kindness is all we can give, and that's enough." He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes shining with something deeper than gratitude. Then he nodded, a single small gesture of thanks, and stepped out into the morning light. Emily turned back to her work, the clatter of plates and soft chatter of customers filling the space around her, but her mind was far away, caught on the simple weight of that exchange. She didn't see William Burke pause just outside the window, his hand resting lightly on the doorframe as he watched her for another moment. James Whittaker had asked William for a favor, a small test, he called it. He wanted to be sure that Emily's kindness wasn't just a fleeting moment, but something deeper. William had agreed without hesitation. He'd known James for years and trusted his instincts, and after what he just witnessed, he knew James had been right. He stepped back from the cafe window, pulling out his phone. The morning light glinted off the cracked screen as he typed a short message. "You were right, she's the real thing." He hit send, then tucked the phone back into his coat and disappeared down the street, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. Back inside Riverbend Cafe, Emily was wiping down the counter when her boss, Frank, walked over. He'd seen the exchange, the quiet way she'd paid for the man's breakfast without saying a word. His brow was furrowed, his mouth pressed into a thin line. "You know," he said quietly, his voice low so the customers wouldn't hear, "that's coming out of your tips. You can't just give meals away like that." Emily met his gaze, her expression calm. "I know," she said simply, "but he looked like he needed it, and sometimes that's enough of a reason." Frank shook his head, but he didn't argue further. He'd known Emily long enough to understand that once she set her mind to something, there was no swaying her. He turned back to the kitchen, muttering under his breath about bleeding hearts and empty registers. Emily just smiled faintly and kept working. She didn't mind the extra shift or the few dollars she'd lost. In her heart, she knew it had been the right thing to do. She moved through the rest of the morning with a quiet ease, her steps steady and sure. Across town, James sat in his office, the soft glow of the desk lamp spilling across a stack of reports, but his mind wasn't on the numbers or the emails that blinked in on his computer screen. It was on Emily, the quiet strength in her eyes, the way she'd cared for his son without question. When the message from William came in, he read it once, then again. "You were right, she's the real thing." James leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming lightly on the polished wood of the desk. He trusted his instincts, but seeing it confirmed brought a sense of peace he hadn't expected. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the office fade into the background. In his mind, he saw Emily as she'd been that morning, steady, unassuming, and kind, and he knew without a doubt that this was just the beginning. The day moved on, the world outside shifting from bright morning to the soft haze of afternoon. At Riverbend Cafe, Emily took a short break, stepping out back to lean against the cool brick wall. She closed her eyes, the scent of rain still clinging to the air, and let herself breathe for a moment. She didn't know that James had watched her through the window that first day, or that he'd asked his friend to test her kindness. She didn't know that her quiet actions had set something in motion, something that would ripple far beyond the walls of the little cafe. She just knew that in that moment, she was exactly where she was meant to be, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The next morning, Emily opened the doors of Riverbend Cafe just as the first light of dawn slipped through the windows. She moved through the quiet space, her footsteps soft on the worn floors. There was a peace to the early hour, a gentle promise that the day held something good. She was wiping down the counter when the bell over the door chimed, and a familiar figure stepped inside. It was William Burke, his coat still dusty from the road, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Emily looked up, surprised to see him again so soon. "Morning," she said, setting aside the rag. William nodded, his eyes warm as he stepped closer. "Morning, Emily," he said, his voice steady. He hesitated for just a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather wallet. "I think I owe you something," he said quietly. Emily frowned, her brow creasing. "You don't owe me anything," she said gently. "You needed a meal, that was enough." William's smile deepened, but there was something in his eyes that told her this was more than a simple thank you. "I wasn't really in need," he said softly, his voice lowering so only she could hear. "My name is William Burke. I worked with James Whittaker yesterday. That was a test to see if your kindness was real," and it was. Emily felt the words land in the quiet air around them, the weight of them settling slowly in her chest. She didn't speak right away, just looked at him, her mind turning over the meaning of what he'd said. William reached out, resting a gentle hand on the edge of the counter. "James wanted to be sure," he said, "and now he is." Before she could respond, the bell over the door chimed again. James Whittaker stepped inside, his coat neatly pressed, his eyes calm, but searching. He paused in the doorway, his gaze resting on Emily for a long moment before he spoke. "May I?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying a weight that filled the room. Emily nodded, her hands twisting slightly at her sides. James stepped forward, his presence steady and sure. "I want to thank you," he said, his tone gentle but firm, "for what you did for my son, for what you did yesterday, too. You didn't have to." But you did. Emily shook her head, her voice soft. It was nothing. She said again, but James only smiled faintly. It wasn't nothing, he said, it was everything. He paused, glancing at William before continuing. You see, Emily, he said, his voice lowering just enough to feel like a secret shared, I needed to know that your kindness wasn't just for show, that it was something real, and you proved that more than once. Emily swallowed hard, the words catching in her throat. She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. James reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a simple envelope, setting it on the counter between them. Inside is an offer, he said, a position managing one of our new restaurants. It's more than a job, it's a chance to build something, to bring that same warmth you shared with my son and with William to a place that needs it. Emily stared at the envelope, her breath caught in her chest. She felt the weight of it, the possibility it held. I don't know what to say, she murmured, her voice trembling just a little. James smiled again, his eyes kind. Just say yes if it feels right, he said. We've seen who you are, Emily, and we believe in you. For a long moment, the cafe was silent, but for the soft hum of the coffee machine behind her, Emily took a breath, her fingers brushing against the envelope. She thought of the boy in the rain, of the man with tired eyes and empty pockets, of the quiet dignity she tried to hold on to every day. She thought of how small acts of kindness could ripple out, touching lives she hadn't even known she could reach, and she realized in that quiet moment that she was ready. Yes, she said softly, her voice steady now. I'd be honored. James nodded, his expression softening with relief. Good, he said simply, then it's settled. William smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Welcome to the family, Emily, he said, and she felt the warmth of the words settle around her like a promise kept. In the days that followed, Emily's life began to shift in ways she'd never expected. The new restaurant was beautiful, warm wood and soft lighting, a place that felt like home. Even on the first day, she stepped into her role with the same quiet dedication she'd always carried, guiding her team with patience and grace. She still rose early every morning, still wiped down the counters herself, still greeted every guest with a gentle smile. She refused to let the new title change who she was, because in her heart, she knew that kindness didn't come from a uniform or a paycheck, it came from the quiet choices we make every day when no one is watching. One rainy afternoon, weeks after she'd taken the job, Emily stood at the front window of the new restaurant, watching the drops gather on the glass. She saw her reflection there, soft and steady, her eyes bright with something like peace. She turned back to the room behind her, to the laughter of families sharing a meal, to the small moments of comfort and warmth that filled the space she now called her own. She saw the way her staff moved, each one working with quiet pride, and she felt a deep, steady satisfaction bloom in her chest. James came by sometimes, always with Lucas and two. The boy still wore that same gentle smile, still looked at Emily like she was a small miracle, and every time he did, Emily felt the quiet echo of that morning in the rain, a reminder that kindness is never lost. It lives on in every gentle word, every small gesture, every hand reached out to lift someone else. Emily never forgot where she started. She never let herself forget the lessons she'd learned in the soft hum of Riverbend Cafe. She knew that life could change in an instant, that the world could shift beneath your feet, but she also knew that some things never changed, like the warmth of a cup of cocoa on a cold morning, like the quiet dignity of a hand offered in help, like the soft, certain truth that kindness, real kindness, can ripple out further than we ever imagine. So every day, Emily wiped down the tables herself, her hands steady and sure. She greeted each guest with that same gentle smile, her eyes warm with welcome, and in those small quiet acts, she honored the simple truth she had always believed, that kindness is a gift, one that asks for nothing but changes everything. And for Emily Carter, that was more than enough. It was everything. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition, some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.